So as a sports fan, one of the most common sayings that you will hear coaches telling their players is to play to the final whistle. If you've ever been on a sports team, you know that coaches are constantly telling that to their kids or their team. They say, hey, you got to play to the final whistle. Don't stop until the job is done. You know, if you're going to win, you got to start strong, but in many cases, you even need to finish stronger. Well, one University of Oregon runner didn't listen to his coaches, and he had to deal with the consequences of not finishing strong. We were having some technical difficulties, so we're going to stream it right from YouTube, and so hopefully this works. Hopefully. If it doesn't, yeah. I was saying we were going to play the Jeopardy music, but that was going to be bad. And look we're almost there. Full screen. Bingo. And now,
take my word for it, there's a moral to this story.
Yeah, it looked like a coronation for Tonje Pepio. He's getting the crowd. He wants the crowd to cheer his performance, and at the end, he gets pipped. He gets pipped by Marin Simon of Washington. And you just can't do this kind of stuff, Lewis.
You can, and you see his face, and you know no one has to say anything. They don't have to explain it to him. He'll never make that mistake again.
Yeah, so, all right, that's kind of hard to watch, isn't it? You kind of like it, though, because he's showboat, and he's like, look at me, I'm top dog. And then that guy from Washington is like, you're a fool. And he passes him, and he ends up winning the race. That video actually on YouTube, it was posted 8 years ago, and right now it has over 5.5 million views on it, which is crazy. Because that guy will live and go down in perpetuity as the guy who had the lead in the 800-meter race and then started celebrating way too early and then was passed and got second place. He will be remembered as the guy who stopped short. Now, the good news for him is that he's not alone, because there's a myriad of examples of people who are right on the verge of the finish line, but instead of finishing strong, they stop short. In fact, today in our text in Numbers chapter 32, you can turn there now, we see the exact same thing happening. You see, there's a group of people that is right on the finish line. They are right on the verge of the promised land. But instead of going into the promised land, they pump the brakes and they stop short. Numbers 32. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the story, I want to describe the context for us because it will make the story more punchy and more memorable. And so the story starts 400 years before Numbers chapter 32. God promises a man by the name of Abraham that he is going to give his descendants a land of promise, also known as the Promised Land. Well, a lot happened in these 400 years. For example, the nation of Israel, which was a small nomadic group, entered into the land of Egypt, where eventually they were enslaved. And when they were enslaved there, their population boomed because they just kept multiplying and growing, eventually to the point where there were 2 to 4 million Jewish people, Israelites, living in the land of Egypt in slavery. And so God eventually raises up a guy by the name of Moses, and Moses is told by God to lead the people out of Egypt back to the land of promise. So Moses marches up to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. Pharaoh says, no way, Jose, hit the road, Jack, don't you come back, no more, no more, no more. And Moses says, no, you're going to do it, sends a bunch of plagues, and eventually he gets to the point where the people of Israel are able to walk through out of Egypt and towards the promised land. Now, if you were with us at the beginning of our series through the book of Numbers, you would remember that I told you that this journey from Egypt to the promised land should have been an easy journey. It should have only been about a 2-week journey, maybe even 10 days. But instead of taking 2 weeks, you guys know what happens. They instead wander in the desert for 40 years in big, gigantic circles. You see, the people of Israel, they had this horrible habit of disobedience. They became experts at doing what I like to call clinching defeat from the jaws of victory. And so time after time after time, the people sin, and their sin results in them wandering aimlessly through the desert. Well, here in Numbers 32, the 40 years is almost up, and they are right on the border of the promised land. Last week, I showed you a picture of sort of the layout here, and I want to show you it again. The nation of Israel is camped right here in a valley on the east side of the Jordan River, and then to the west is Jericho. Now, if you remember, everything on the east side, God did not promise them, but everything on the west of the Jordan was the promised land. So they are just spitting distance away. They are within striking distance to the land that God had promised their ancestor Abraham over 400 years before. But what we're going to see here is that right when they are on the finish line, right when they are on the verge of crossing the Jordan from the east to the west, there are 3 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. They're going to pump the brakes. They're going to start showboating like the University of Oregon runner, and they're going to stop short. So look in your Bibles, Numbers 32, starting in verse 1. Let's see what happens. It's a very cool story. Got some big words in here too, so don't make fun of me if I butcher it, because I might. It says this: the Reubenites and Gadites had a very large number of livestock. When they surveyed the lands of Jazer and Gilead, they saw that the region was a good one for livestock. So the Gadites and Reubenites came to Moses, the priest Eleazar, and the leaders of the community, and said this: the territory of Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sebam, Nebo, and Beon, which the Lord struck down before the community of Israel, is good land for livestock, and your servants own livestock. They said, if we have found favor with you, let this land be given to your servants as a possession, but don't make us cross the Jordan. Now, there's 2 things here from this story that just jump out to me about their request. First, their request was problematic because, again, the land that they were wanting to camp on was not the land that God had promised them. God says, I'm going to promise you all of the land on the west of the Jordan, and they are saying, no, we're going to take the land that you didn't promise us on the east of the Jordan. So that's the first issue. The second problem is in verse 5. We see that Reuben and Gad make the request to not cross the Jordan at all. Look what they say. Don't make us cross the Jordan. They go, we know what the future is going to hold. We know what everybody else is going to be doing, but we have a special request. We don't want to cross the Jordan River at all. Now, if we zoom out here and just sort of look at the context, let's be honest, that's a dirtbag move, right? Because, stay with me, for 40 years, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have been wandering in the desert with all of the other tribes of Israel. And now they're getting to the finish line, and they're saying, you know what? We don't want to do that. They want to stay on the east side of the Jordan. They want to sleep in their silk sheets. They want to sit on their porches and rock in rocking chairs, smoking cigars and drinking whiskey as everybody else crosses over into the other side of the Jordan, into the promised land. This would be like, imagine you're doing a group project for 40 years with a group of 10, 11 other people. For 40 years, that's a big group project. And the day of presentation comes around, and then you say, you know what? I'm not feeling it. I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to let you guys go. You would be ticked off. You would not be happy, even in the slightest. Well, that's what they are doing here. They're right at the finish line, and they're backing out. So the question we need to ask ourselves is this: why are they doing this? Why are these people, why are the leaders of this tribe willing to call it quits right before the land of promise? And I think the answer is fairly simple. They liked what they saw, right? They liked what they saw. And this is our first point today. If you're taking notes, which I hope you are, I need you to write this down. Looks can be deceiving. Looks can be deceiving. The leaders of Reuben, the leaders of Gad, the leaders of the half-tribe of Manasseh, they liked what they saw. We're told that they have massive herds of animals, and trust me, they had massive herds of animals. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of heads of animals, all right? This is more animals than you and I can really even comprehend. And with all of these animals, these massive amounts of animals, this would require them to have massive amounts of land, and not only just land, massive amounts of fertile land. It's one thing to have 1 million acres in the desert. It's another thing to have 1,000 acres of beautiful, lush sanctuary areas, right? Well, the area that they were standing in was pretty awesome. In fact, if you go on Google Earth right now and you look at this region of the world east of the Jordan, you will see that there are many streams, creeks, and rivers that are running through this very region, this very valley, that lead to the Dead Sea. Now, all of this water going through all of this dirt makes the land very fertile. In fact, it's very interesting. If you go on Google Earth and you just look at this, it's green, 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 absolute beautiful, right across the mountains, death of desert, right? In fact, there's a bunch of off-road ATV dune stuff. I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that'd be pretty cool. But then right below the valley is just a bunch of greenery. It's beautiful. And so these leaders are looking at the scenery, and they're looking at all of their animals, and they're thinking to themselves, why would we go any further? This looks awesome. But the problem here, friends, is that looks can be deceiving. I'm going to show you why. You see, all throughout the Bible, there were countless examples of times where people have made decisions simply off of what they see, and it has bit them in the butt. It's been very bad. I want to give you some examples. In Genesis chapter 3, this is probably the most famous one and we're aware of. In Genesis chapter 3, Eve saw that the fruit of the forbidden tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and so she did what? She took it. She saw it and said, yep, I'm in, and she took it. In Genesis 13, when Lot, Abraham's nephew, saw that the plains of the Jordan were fertile and luscious, he separated from Abraham and he led his family into danger. Later on, in Genesis 19, Lot again saw the apparent success of Sodom and Gomorrah. He moved his family there, where all kinds of evil took place, and it eventually led to the death of his wife. Now, it's really interesting. In fact, I was reading Genesis 19 this week, and I will just kind of say this, try to say it off the top of my head. It's a horribly gross story, because after Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, Lot and his 2 daughters were in a cave, and his 2 daughters seduced Lot, got them pregnant, and then both of his daughters had sons, which would later be the main people of the Ammonites and the Moabites. And so it's very interesting. Who are the Israelites fighting in these chapters? It's the descendants of Lot who made a bad decision based on what he saw. It's very interesting. The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Amorites, all of those people were distant cousins of the people of Israel. Once again, sight can be deceiving. But let's get practical. What about men and women? Men, if we are looking for a wife or a person to marry, we are reminded in Proverbs 31:30 that charm is deceptive and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord should be praised. In other words, Scripture says she might be smoking, sizzling hot. She might be really good looking on the outside, but the problem is if she's rotten on the inside, you got to get as far away as you possibly can, because then that's going to be a whole life of just brutality. And the same goes for men. Ladies, if you're looking at a man and he has really good game, he can talk the talk and walk the walk, but you know who he truly is on the inside, you get away. Doesn't matter if he looks like Brad Pitt. Doesn't matter if he looks all that good. You run the other direction. What you see is oftentimes not what you get. Oftentimes, too, another one is when we're trying to find a church, we're reminded of what Paul says in 2 Timothy 4:3, that a time will come when preachers are much more concerned about the way they look and the way they talk and making people feel warm and fuzzy inside than proclaiming the truth about Jesus. That's what 2 Timothy 4:3 says. It says that a time will come where preachers will be raised up who, listen, just want to tickle your ears. You ever hear that? You ever hear that? You listen to some like mega church pastor on YouTube and they make really good jokes. They look super sly, like a really good looking car salesman, but in reality, they're just tickling your ears. They don't ever talk about the truth of Jesus. They don't ever approach the topics that are culturally sensitive. They just want to tickle your ears, and you pay that tithe check. Paul says if you're a part of a church like that, you run the other direction. We're not in the business of tickling ears here at River Valley, all right? We like to talk about the truth of the gospel and what Jesus has to say to us. In Colossians 2:23, Paul urges believers to be on the lookout for people who claim that righteous living is only based on outward performance. Paul says there's a lot of Christians who think that what it means to be a Christian is just what you do on the outside, how you look, how you talk, how you walk. Paul says if you follow or you are one of these legalistic type Christians, go the other direction. I guess what I'm getting at here is this. Write this down. God is much more concerned about who you are than how you look. God is much more concerned about who you are than how you look. Because what we see can oftentimes be very different than what there really is, than what actually is. And don't be deceived, friends. God knows the heart. He sees what is inside of us. And I'll tell you, the irony of this situation is that in the end, it's very interesting. Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they are given this land. They set up camp there. But it's interesting, when we fast forward to 1 Chronicles 5, the first 3 tribes that are attacked by the Assyrians is Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. And for the rest of Israel's history, those 3 tribes are going to be separated by a physical border, which sort of divides them relationally. They are out on an island. In other words, what looked good to them, the land, actually wasn't beneficial for them in the long run. You see, there's a lot of things, friends, that look really, 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 really good. But when we start to think about it critically and we see it for what it is, it's an empty pit that has nothing really for us. My question for you is this, and I want you to think about this. Is there something in your life right now that looks really good, but deep down, you know that it is not what God has in store for you? Think about it. Is there something in your life right now, maybe an opportunity, maybe a circumstance, maybe a person, that looks really, 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 really good, but there's that nagging, quiet, still, small voice in your heart and head where you know for a fact that is not what God has in store for me? Maybe you've been offered a promotion at a job that comes with more money, but that promotion is going to require you to be gone from your family a lot more. Maybe for some of you, it's the idea of retirement, right? You are getting ready. You're right at the time where you're going to retire, and you are so looking forward to it. You are going to buy that RV, park it on the beach, sip Mai Tais, and just live out your days on the coast, doing what you want, how you want. But you know that as a Christian, there's no such thing as retirement. And that in your golden years, as you age, that's actually a time where you can be most beneficial, and you feel like God is calling you to a particular area in your life. But man, the allure of buying that RV and just doing that thing is so incredibly powerful. God's calling you to be used in a mighty area. I don't know everybody's circumstances here, but what I do know is that looks can be deceiving. And when we base all of our decisions based on what we see, friends, the truth is that there oftentimes is a lot of deception involved in that. Don't settle for the east when God is preparing something great on the west for you. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Don't settle for the east when God says, no, the land of promise is actually on the west. That's the first thing we need to see from this story, which is that, number one, looks can be deceiving. And so the story continues. They ask Moses, they say, hey, we don't want to cross the river. We want to stay here. But look at verse 6. Moses is not happy. But Moses asked the Gadites and the Reubenites, should your brothers go to war while you stay here? Why are you discouraging the Israelites from crossing into the land the Lord has given them? That's what your ancestors did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. After they went up as far as the Eshcol Valley and saw the land, they discouraged the Israelites from entering the land the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger burned that day, and he swore an oath. Because they did not remain loyal to me, none of the men 20 years old or more who came up from Egypt will see the land I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. None except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, because they did remain loyal to God. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until the whole generation that had done what was evil in the Lord's sight was gone. And then he says this, and here you, a brood of sinners, stand in your ancestors' place, adding even more to the Lord's burning anger against Israel. If you turn back from following him, he will once again leave this people in the wilderness, and you will destroy all of them. So Moses is not happy. He's quite angry. And there are two things from his response that I want us to take notice of. Our second point today is this, number 2. Comfortability is a trap. Write that down, write that down, write that down. Comfortability is a trap. This is the first thing that Moses says to their request. Look at verse 6. Should your brothers go to war while you stay here? Should your brothers go to war while you stay here? Are you seriously going to sit on the east side and just kick your feet up while your brothers, who you have been wandering with for 40 years, cross over the Jordan and go in pursuit of what God has promised them? Are you seriously going to settle for comfortability when God is calling you to something else? That's what he says here. Now, if you've been at this church any amount of time, you know that this concept of what I call comfortable Christianity is something that just juices me up. It really fires me up, and I'll tell you why. This is why. Because I believe that there is this massive misconception fundamentally about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to be a Christian. This is important. I need you to listen to this. I think there are a lot of people, specifically in the United States of America, with a Western way of thinking that believe that following Jesus is this. You come to church on Sunday, you tithe occasionally, you listen to worship music maybe 2-3 times a week. You pray to God not just because you want to get close to him, but because you need him. And all of this is going to result in what you have been promised is the quote-unquote good life, where we never experience hardship, difficulty, and no pain. And I think in the end, many people believe that being a Christian means that we'll just have this Instagram-worthy lifestyle of complete bliss, happiness. You'll be able to travel, take photos. Your bank account will never run dry, and everything's going to be awesome. Everything's going to be perfect. Everything's going to be magical. Now, don't get me wrong. Following Jesus is beautiful, and it's joyful, and it is fun. It's not bad on the surface. But what I'm concerned about is this. It's the underlying attitude of this disposition. Because the underlying attitude of what I'm noticing in Western Christian culture is that there are a lot of people who want to use the principles of God without surrendering to the way of God. Are you hearing me? There's a lot of people who like the things about God, who like the things that are kind of sold to us in this Western culture of what it means to be a Christian. They like the idea of being a part of a family of believers that comes together on Saturday and does serve projects. They like the idea of knowing that their afterlife is secured for them. They like the idea of Jesus. They like the moral principles of Jesus. But if they're being gut level honest, they have not submitted their life to the way of Jesus. And friends, listen to me. That is a problem. And I'll tell you what, that screams to me Matthew chapter 7. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out many demons in your name? And on that day, I will declare to them, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, for I never knew you. What are you talking about, Jesus? Look at all the things I did for you. Jesus says, you did the things that I say are good, but you don't know me. Friends, that's a problem. That's a major, 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 major problem. Because did you know that right now, if you're a Christian in this room, and I recognize that there are some people here who would say that you're not Christian, so I'm speaking specifically right now to Christians. Did you know that if you are a Christian in this room, your life, you have been called to a selfless kind of life? Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. That's a selfless commandment, friends. So I'm going to say something to you right now that I hope rubs you in the wrong way in the best way possible, okay? And that is this: your life is not about you. Let's sit in that. I want you to think about that. Your life is not about you. I'm talking to you Christians. Your life is not about you. Your life is not about your happiness. Your life is not about your success. Your life is not about your comfort. Are you hearing me? The purpose of your life, if you are a Christian in this room, is to worship and glorify God in everything you say and in everything you do. And there are going to be times where worshiping and glorifying God in everything we say and in everything we do, listen to me, pulls us out of our comfort zone. And so here's what this means for us. It means that if you are a follower of Jesus, it means that we as Christians will joyfully inconvenience our life for the worship and glory of God. I like that phrase. We will joyfully inconvenience our life for the worship and glory of God. It means that we will help people when it hurts, when it's inconvenient for us. It means that we will prioritize people when we don't want to. It means that we will inconvenience our life for the glory of God. That's what it means. C.S. Lewis wrote in the Screwtape Letters this. He said, the safest road to hell is the gradual one that's buffered by all kind of worldly comfort. He's right. I think one of the curses of a Western, successful, affluent culture is that we're comfortable. And we get too comfortable. And I was thinking about this week, and I want you to try to just think this with me. How different, just go here in your minds, how different do you think our world would be if Christians took our addiction to comfort and leisure and we reoriented it and we refocused it on pursuing the glory of God and the worship of God in everything we do in our lives? Think about it. How different do you think our world, our nation, our city, our state, our family, our community, our workplace would be if Christians didn't just follow the principles of God, but we followed the way of God? The person of Jesus. Joyfully inconveniencing ourselves for the glory of God. Man, the world would look different. The world would look a lot different. The men in this story, they wanted comfortability. They wanted to sit on the west side or the east side. They want to sit on the east side and kick their feet up and look at this beautiful grass. Moses says, friends, comfortability is a trap. So that's what we can learn from there. The next thing we see Moses say is this, number 3. I love this point. Individual actions affect everyone. Do you hear that? Individual actions affect everyone. Look what Moses says. He says, why are you discouraging the Israelites from crossing into the land the Lord has given them? Moses here is saying, hey, you recognize that by you refusing to enter into the promised land, your individual choice is going to seep through the people like a poison, and it's going to influence them in a negative way. It's going to dishearten them. It's going to make them feel like, well, actually, the desert wasn't so bad. Moses says, your decision is going to affect everyone. Now, again, this is something that I notice in our culture, not just in the Christian culture, but in the culture at large. And there is this idea that my actions are my own, right? This idea that when it comes to social issues, if it doesn't affect me, if it doesn't hurt me, then I don't care what other people do. You do you do what you want, and as long as what you do doesn't affect me, go for it. Live and let live. It's a very libertarian point of view. I'll give you some examples. I personally don't engage in prostitution. But if a woman wants to prostitute herself out and she's consenting to it, by all means. And if a man is willing to pay for it, it's her body, it's his money, so be it. If someone wants to take meth, they're their own person. They can shoot it up in their arm. They can snort it, sniff it, jab it. If somebody's selling it and making a buck off it, by all means, go for it. It's their body. It's their individual choice. Well, of course, the problem with that philosophy is that it's about half a centimeter deep philosophically. Because the problem with it is that kind of thinking leads to a bad society. I'll tell you why. All you got to do is drive down to Riverside Park right now, and you will see a bunch of individual choices made by people that are affecting the society as a whole. You see, this idea that your actions don't affect society, don't affect culture, are just flat out dumb. It's a bad way of thinking, and it's a really dumb philosophy. Because the reality is that the choices you make and the decisions that you make and the way that you lead your family and the way you lead your life as an individual is what is going to create culture, is what is going to create society. Now, I want to give you a more rosy example outside of Riverside Park being shut down in Grants Pass. The example is this. Derek and Whitney, they're going to raise Baylor in the Lord. Praise God. The way Derek and Whitney raise Baylor in the Lord is going to affect the way that Taylor and Corey raise Reagan in the Lord. The way that Taylor and Corey raise Reagan in the Lord is going to affect the way that Jesse and Ellie raise Harrison in the Lord. The way that Jesse and Ellie raise Harrison in the Lord is going to affect the way that Megan and Eli raise Henry in the Lord. The way that Megan and Eli raise Henry in the Lord is going to affect the way that all of us who have children here, Olivia and Aaron, Michael, Michaela, Grayson, Zia, all of us, we all raise our kids. It's going to affect because your individual choices and the decisions that we make seep out through society. And here's why. Because God created us that way. God created us that way. He created us to be relational beings. Truman, in his book, Strange New World, describes it like this. He says, for one's identity to flourish, it has to be acknowledged by others. Because we're relational beings, we need the acceptance of others in order to be comfortable with who we are. This means that society must serve the purpose of meeting individual psychological needs. In other words, listen, we are who we are by what we consume and what we are influenced by. Your individual choices affect everyone. The way I love my wife, listen to this, the way I love my wife is going to have cultural ramifications in my community. If I treat my wife bad, that's going to affect my community. The way that Jesse loves Ellie is going to affect our community. The way that we manage our money, the way that we prioritize what we spend our money on is going to affect our community. The way that we devote our lives to serving God with a lifestyle of service is going to affect our community. I got to give a shout out here to the Dennises. I remember this so clearly. I remember John and Julie with their kids, Bryce and Bree. And I remember even my parents going, look at the way John and Julie prioritize serving people. That's something aspirational. And so I remember going, John and Julie are there. We're going to go there as well. It's a good example. We're wired like this. There's value in understanding that your individual choices are going to affect society as a whole. It's very, very, very important. I'll tell you, this is one reason why I am not a fan of marriages at the courthouse. I don't like them. I'll tell you why. This isn't in my notes, but I just want to talk about it. Because a marriage is not just a legal binding document. It is that, sure, but a marriage is much more than that. Maddie, right now, we're doing marriage counseling for Grant and Jocelyn. There are a couple here in our church. And they are having a big party. It's going to be up at Lake of the Woods, and a bunch of people are coming. It's going to be awesome. We got the whole park. It's going to be epic, 100 some odd people. And they are getting married in front of witnesses and in front of the Lord. And the reason that is valuable is because marriage is not just a commitment in the eyes of the law that you're together. Marriage is a covenant between God and between man. The reason we have public marriage ceremonies is because you are making a commitment not just between yourself, but also to everyone else, that you are together, united as one flesh, going out into the world, okay? It is a public promise, and there's value in that. One of the things that I always tell people when I officiate their weddings is, I need you to look at your groomsmen, I need you to look at your bridesmaids, and I need you to look at the people out here. You are not just making a commitment before God and in the eyes of the law. You are making a commitment to your community that you are subscribing to a certain set of values before God and man that you should be held accountable to. And I'll tell you this right now, if I treat my wife in a poor way, I know who I made that commitment before. I know that my brother Jesse will call me out. I know that my brother Jake will call me out. I know that Corey will call me out. I know Derek will call me out. I know my friends will call me out because my marriage, while it is very personal, it is also public. It is also public. And so this idea that our individual choices don't have any ramification on culture just doesn't make sense. So Austin, how are we going to change the world? How are we going to transform society? Friends, it's very simple. It starts with you as an individual. It starts with the way that you conduct business in your own life, and it starts with your family. You want to see the culture change? Love your wife. Serve your wife. Dedicate your family to following Jesus, and eventually, when enough individuals start pointing in a good direction, friends, that's how cultures, that's how societies, and that's how worlds are changed. And that's the value of the church. This is why it's so important to be a part of a church, because we're rubbing shoulders, and that's a good thing. We need to be rubbing shoulders with each other. So that's number 3. Your individual actions are going to affect everyone in good ways and in bad ways. Moses recognizes this and he says, hey, your decision to not cross over, it's going to hurt everybody. So the leadership, they go away, they reconvene, they pull their tails out between their legs, and they go, man, we just got a tongue lashing from Moses. Let's talk about it. Look at verse 16. Here's how they say. It says, then they approached him and said, we want to build sheep pens here for our livestock and cities for our dependents. But we will arm ourselves and be ready to go ahead of the Israelites until we've brought them into their place. Meanwhile, our dependents will remain in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the Israelites has taken possession of his inheritance. Yet we will not have an inheritance with them across the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance will be across the Jordan of the east. So again, their hearts, they're still set. They say, no, we want the land of the east. Moses says, okay, fine, you can have it, but there's going to be some stipulations. You're not going to sit here. You're actually going to go with us, and you're actually going to lead us into battle. They say, okay, that's what we'll do. And so Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, they arm up, and they do just that. They cross the river Jordan. They go into the west, and it's beautiful. They actually lead the nation of Israel into war in the front. So they rise to the occasion, and they do what they're supposed to do. Now, what's the main point of this story? What's the key takeaway? I was thinking about it, and I think in the end, the main takeaway is this. God can use our mistakes for his overall mission. I think that's the key takeaway. God can use our mistakes, our failures, our aptitude to quit, our desire to stop short, and in God's perfect sovereignty, he can use it for his overall mission. Don't forget how this story was framed. We're not crossing the Jordan, Moses. We're not doing it. You're not going to get us. We got all these animals. We're not crossing over. There is no way we're doing it. That's how they started, but by the end of this story, they realized who they were and what they were called to do, and then they did it valiantly. This brings me to how I want to close the sermon, which is this. There might be some of us who have fallen into the same trap that these leaders fell into. Maybe we have been seduced by the temptation to settle for what looks good now instead of pursuing what God says is going to be greater for you later. Maybe some of us have believed a false gospel of comfortability. We've bought into this distorted Western view of what it means to be a Christian. Maybe we believe that the purpose of our life is just to experience happiness and comfort. Just be hedonistic. It's all about me. Maybe some of us have believed that the way we live, the way we conduct our lives really doesn't matter. You're just an individual, and the way that you live has no effect on the world. Friends, listen to me. What I love about this story is that regardless of these leaders' aptitudes of stopping short, regardless of their desire to quit, God in his goodness and in his mercy uses their failures for his overall mission. He puts them to the front and they do what they're supposed to do. They fight for Israel and they go after God. The good news for you and me is that the same is true for us. God is going to be with you from the beginning to the end. Last week we talked about the beauty of the cross, and I want to bring it up real quick. There might be some of us who have done exactly what these leaders did. We have the desire to stop short. And I shared last week how back then these people looked forward to the cross and you and I look back to the cross. But friends, the beauty of the cross is that no matter how many times we fail, no matter how many times we doubt, the words of Jesus still remain true. It is finished. You are free. Walk in freedom. You might fail today, you might fail tomorrow. You may have lived your life in comfortability for 45 years, but the promise of Jesus is that you can start new today because of what he did for you. And that's the gospel, friends. It's that we can't, and God interacted and intervened on our behalf so that we can. It's not by anything we do, it's by everything that he did. In other words, the actions that we take are not in a response to our own good abilities, it's in response to the grace that God has given us. It's all because of Jesus, friends. And so here's how I want to close our time today. Jason's going to come up, and he's going to play his guitar softly. And I want to close our time by asking you 3 questions. And I want you to look at these questions, and I want you to think about them. He's going to play the guitar for about 4 or 5 minutes, and I want you to respond by thinking through and praying these questions. They're going to be up on the screen the entire time. First question is this: am I settling for something comfortable instead of pursuing what God is calling me to? There might be some of you right now who are just in the middle of a really comfortable situation. You've got in your groove, but you feel in your heart, in your mind, that God is calling you to something else. Pray through it. Number 2, are there any areas of my life I'm refusing God to enter into? Maybe you are dealing with an addiction, some kind of habit or a hurt that you just find yourself just getting in the rhythm of. Well, take it before the Lord and say, God, I give you this area of my life. I give you my addiction. I give you this heart that is oftentimes confused and perplexed. God, take it, enter in. I'm not gonna hide anything from you. I need you completely and entirely. And then number 3, ask God to awaken in you a fresh spirit to be used by him in every area of your life. Just go before the Lord and say, God, give me a renewed desire to live for you completely. Nothing else, no holds barred. I'm living for you.